This week's lecture is on the Theban Saga and the theme of incest in mythology. We're covering some rather interesting themes right now. Incest, cannibalism, other things that just seem very unsavory. But you have to remember that mythology, when we talk about mythology as a psychological, excuse me for a moment, this is kicking me out of slideshow. I'll go back here. Very good. Okay. When we talk about mythology, remember we've talking about things, it's related to the things in our consciousness that either fascinate us or repel us, okay? Those things that we tend to be unconscious, that we tend to only see in symbol, that we see in dream, that's expressed in, classic literature, that may be expressed in movies or television shows. You see these themes that are repeated over and over again of these various different ideas. And, again, sometimes these are things that make us very, very uncomfortable, but the whole idea is that you need to explore what it is about these things that makes you uncomfortable. What is the source of this? What is this, where do these ideas come from? When it comes to incest, it's one of the oldest taboos that there is. And really, I mean, now I'm sure you could find somebody somewhere where there's cases of, father-daughter love or mother-son, or where you actually have a romantic or sexual liaison that goes on there. But I would suggest that that's a rather rare phenomenon, not a common one. Usually, when I teach this class in person, I ask everybody, "So, how many of you have ever, had these kinds of feelings?" And everybody just kind of looks at you and is just kind of like, "Yeah, well, pretty much." Not that I would necessarily expect anyone to raise their hand if they did, but. And that says something too. I mean, it's something. It's not an acceptable thing. You don't do that. You don't talk about that. Certainly, there are biological taboos against incest that are very obvious, without any other psychological or mythological trappings. But the fact that this theme is included, and I connect it to the Theban Saga, because one of the things that we see in the retelling of these sagas, because in this class we usually do the Theban and the Mycenaean sagas, which relate to the great cities of Thebes, which is what we're talking about today, and the great kingdom of Mycenae, which was where Agamemnon, who was the probably the chief, I don't want to call him the general, but he was one of the chief commanders in the Trojan War. The issues that go on in that family, which seem to relate more to cannibalism than they do to this. But nonetheless, the way that these myths are retold, particularly by the playwrights, particularly by Sophocles, Euripides, and Aeschylus to a certain degree, although they all had their own things that they tended to focus on, or their own morals that they tended to focus on when they were retelling these plays. There's always the sense that a lot of it has to do with personal responsibility. When a certain crime is committed within the family, how are the children to avoid the results of the crime? Okay, and indeed, we will see incest has a lot more to do with the family psychologically than perhaps is at first evident. I mean, yes, obviously, sexual relations with the family we think that's absolutely disgusting. But it's not really about actual sexual relationship within the family, even if that is what goes on in the story. So let's look at the theme. First of all, we look at the Greek gods. The Greek gods are incestuous. Okay, Zeus and Hera, Cronus and Rhea, Phorcys and Cato. All of these gods are brother-sister, and I'm just naming a couple. I mean, it's rampant throughout Greek mythology. All the Titans. Even when people talk about the story of Adam and Eve, they say, well, there's got to be some incest somewhere if they were the first two people and they only had, they had two sons. Well, then they had a third, Seth. But then the question is, well, if there were no other people, then how did they populate? That question comes up all the time. And in the biblical context, that's a very difficult and uncomfortable question. In Greek mythology, that's just sort of how it was. And and again, it's easier to understand if you recognize that when we talk about Zeus and Hera or about Cronus and Rhea, we're not talking about people. We're talking about really forces of nature. Okay, and when these two forces of nature get together, there's a certain result. Okay, these two beget, this other force. So it's really, in a sense, very metaphorical. We're not talking about two human beings in a biological, physical sense having sex. So that's something to keep in mind when you're talking about incestuous relationships between the gods. They're not. It has a different meaning because gods don't. They don't play. There's no morality among the gods because they're just forces. Forces are not moral. They just are. They can be good or bad depending. Okay. So, for instance, if you want to think about, I think I've probably said this before, but if you think about fire as a force, okay, is fire good or bad? Well, fire cooks your food. Fire can burn your house down. I mean, does that make it good or bad? It doesn't make it either. There's no moral component to it. It's a matter of how it's expressed or how it's used or how, how it manifests. So, okay, so we see that this is common among the gods. But that the gods were not talking about the same things as mortals. Now, if we look at some mortals who are part of the incest theme in Greek mythology, we have the Oedipus story, and that we are going to talk about. I gave you a small excerpt from Sophocles' Oedipus Tyrannus, or Oedipus the King, which which shows the moment at which Oedipus recognizes that he is guilty, not only of murder but also of incest. So it's, but that story we will. We'll just put it on the table right now as it's probably the classic incest story in Greek mythology. So classic that Sigmund Freud makes reference to an Oedipus complex. Okay, probably most of you have heard of that in some fashion or other. Okay, now Phaedra and Hippolytus, you may or may not have heard that story, or of Myrrha and Theus. These are cases of parent-child. Well, not really. Well, yes, because Phaedra is actually the stepmother of Hippolytus. So, maybe the incest part there is a little, but, and what's interesting, actually, there's no actual incest there, but what happens is Phaedra is the wife of Hippolytus's father. I mean, she's the queen. And Hippolytus is a devotee of the goddess Artemis. He practices chastity. Now, in doing so, he spurns Aphrodite, and he spurns people who, engage in acts of love and romance and marriage, and of course this offends Aphrodite greatly, so she makes Phaedra fall in love with him. Okay, this is Aphrodite's usual modus operandi. When she gets revenge, it's usually by creating a very impossible or inappropriate relationship situation. And Phaedra falls in love with Hippolytus. She actually tries to ravish him. He spurns her. He leaves. And she gets revenge on him by telling the father that he tried to rape her. So Hippolytus is killed by his father by being dragged around, behind horses, dragged to his death on a from a chariot. So, and then of course later on he finds out that Hippolytus wasn't guilty. Too late by then. This has always been a good example of devotion, where devotion to a god does not save you. Okay. Now he was devoted to Artemis, and Artemis loved him, and in fact she there's a cult of Hippolytus that develops particularly within Rome. You see the Hippolytus cult with the temples of Diana, and Diana, of course, is the Roman counterpart to Artemis. And he has a different name in Rome, Wieribus. We'll talk about that when we get to Roman mythology. But Hippolytus is, he represents that imbalance of, in spurning Aphrodite, he creates an imbalance. Okay, it's not simply enough that he's decided to be chaste. It's that he's also got nothing but negative criticism for people who, who decide that is their choice, that they want to be married, that they want to fall in love. And Artemis, because he has insulted Aphrodite, she really can't say anything. She doesn't step up to the plate and say to Aphrodite, "Whoa, that's my devotee. Don't touch him." That doesn't happen. Basically it's like, "Oh, well, you offended Aphrodite. Well, I'm sorry. This is," it's sort of like your actions have consequences. There's no god that's going to step in and save you from those. Now, you do see cases of this within the Trojan War, where different gods will jump in to save, stop various heroes, but generally they're working within the confines of fate. It's not that person's time to die in battle. So they step in and they say, they protect that person or put a cloud around them or something. But this is a different case. This is where Hippolytus has, violated, created an imbalance, and this is the negative result of that. Okay. So Phaedra and Hippolytus is sort of tangentially incestual, but it's worth mentioning because it falls along a similar theme as Myrrha and Theas. And they are the parents of Adonis. You remember we talked about in love mythology the relationship between Aphrodite and Adonis and her tussle with Persephone over keeping him because he's supposed to be so beautiful. Now Myrrha, Theas is her father, okay? And again, Myrrha has offended Aphrodite. Some people say it's because she simply refused to follow convention in some versions of the myth, the social convention of marriage or of what she should properly do. So she was made, again, in not all versions, but certainly in some of them, Aphrodite makes her fall in love with her father. And her nursemaid ends up contriving to help her have sex with her father, but when he finds out, he draws his sword and he pursues her. He's going to kill her because, for committing this crime. But so for 9 months she runs, and she finally asks the gods to help her, and they feel bad for her, so they turn her into a myrrh tree, Myrrh. And yes, that is the same myrrh that, if you followed the story of the Magi in the birth of Jesus, they bring frankincense, gold, and myrrh, and that's what they're bringing, is myrrh from the myrrh tree. Okay, so Myrrha she's turned into this tree, and and so again, there's this theme of because she violated the social norm, that somehow she has been so that she ends up creating this sort of imbalance, and then she ends up falling in love with her father. Now, there's a little more to it than that. It's not just simply a punishment kind of a thing. There's a little bit more to the incest taboo than that. It definitely is family-centered as opposed to society-centered, and that is one of the great problems with it, okay? And by the way, when she turns into a myrrh tree, Adonis comes popping out of the trunk because he's born, because she was pregnant with him. He's ends up being, she ends up having a child. So, okay, so we've got some things, and Oedipus, as we'll see, is very different from these other two. Oedipus hasn't committed any kind of transgressions against Aphrodite. Oedipus is, his story, along with Orestes' story, is some of the ultimate victims of fate. And it's funny that they're both part of these long family sagas. But we'll move on to that in a minute. Okay, now let's look at the genealogy of Thebes. As we see at the top here, we have Cadmus and Harmonia. Now, Cadmus and Harmonia, Cadmus is the brother of Europa, okay? Europa is the one who was she's seduced by Zeus in the form of a bull, and he carries her off to the island of Crete. And on Crete, she gives birth to her sons Minos and Rhadamanthus, okay? Minos is considered to be the great king of Crete. He is... He's considered to be, in fact, such an exemplar of good ruling that he becomes a judge in the underworld after his death. Now, this, of course, is a much later idea from, the archaic period, but certainly by Plato's time, that was, acceptable. And Rhadamanthus as well. I mean, him and his brothers, the children of Zeus and Europa, end up exemplifying great leadership and great kingship. Minos is also connected with the Minotaur, because he doesn't sacrifice his best bull to a Poseidon. Poseidon makes his wife fall in love with the best bull, and she has Daedalus, their craftsman, build a contraption so she can have sex with it, and she ends up giving birth to something called the Minotaur. It's basically half bull, half human, and so they put it inside of a labyrinth, and they, because there's a they're avenging a wrong from the Athenians during the Olympic Games. The Athenians have to send a tribute of 10 young men every so many years to be fed to the Minotaur. And it is Theseus who eventually slays the Minotaur. But that's a different myth, but it's the same Minos. So Europa is the brother of, the sister of Cadmus. Well, Cadmus is actually sent out to, the way the story begins, is sent by his father, the king, to go find Europa. You know, when she disappears, where did she go? So Cadmus wanders around trying to find her, and when she gets there, when he gets there, he receives an oracle that he should just give up looking for Europa, and instead he's supposed to follow a cow to a particular place and found a city there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I have some slides on Cadmus and Harmonia. Harmonia being his wife, she is the daughter of Ares and Aphrodite. Okay, when the two of them have their illicit affair in Olympus. So she's interestingly the daughter of War and Peace, and her name is Harmony. So that's a so you see some rather blatant symbolism there. But they're children. Okay, we have Ino, we have Autonoe, we have Semele, and Agave, and Polydorus. And if we just take a look at some of the characters here. Now, Semele, as we learned from the lecture on Dionysus, is the mother of Dionysus, and she mates with Zeus, and Dionysus is born. So it's very interesting. There's a mortal origin to one of the Olympian immortals. Now, of course, there's the Orphic version of that story where Zeus and Persephone actually produced Dionysus. And Dionysus is supposed to be the successor to Zeus. But that then the Titans tear him apart, and then Athena saves his heart, and he's recreated and so forth. But that is not in the other versions. Semele is his mother. Okay, and you'll notice that his brother, the child of Agave and Acheon, is Pentheus. And Pentheus we're going to talk about in a moment. So Pentheus and Dionysus are brothers. And these are the ones that you really need to focus on. Some of the other people were not... There's so many names here, I don't need you to remember all these names, but those two are important. And then, of course, at the other side, you see Labdacus. Now, Labdacus is also important, okay? And that whole particular line, because as you can see, it goes to Laius and then to Oedipus. Okay, and then, so that's the one that we're going to focus on. At the bottom, you may notice Megara under Eurydice and Creon. That Eurydice, by the way, is not the same one who was the wife of Orpheus. This is a different Eurydice. Creon, though, is the brother of Jocasta, as you see, and Jocasta is married to both Laius and Oedipus. Creon features in a lot of Greek drama and myth. And their child is Megara, and Megara features into the myth of Heracles, or Hercules, and Megara is actually killed by Heracles. They're married, they have children, but he ends up slaying all of them, driven mad by Hera. So just sort of a brief overview of the Theban genealogy. This might be a good chart for you to refer back to when you're trying to remember some of these connections. Okay, so here's Europa. And again, I mentioned Minos here. Like I said, she also was the mother of Rhadamanthus. And of course, the continent of Europe is named for Europa. And like I said, she is settled on the island of Crete, which is probably one of the first great Western civilizations that we know of. The Minoan civilization was a linear A civilization, and they probably flourished around 1600 BC. Now, of course, there was a whole Assyrian civilization that flourished even before that, but that is, the first one that's closest to Greece that we know of. And then they, of course, died out, and the Mycenaean civilization became dominant. And then at the end of what is often recorded as the Trojan War, whether that's a real or mythical event, we're not sure. But assuming that there was some kind of an event like a war or a catastrophe, that ended Mycenaean civilization. Greek descended into the Dark Ages until they gained writing again around the time of Homer. So again, we're starting to look back at these origins here, and these myths are referring back to how some of these great civilizations came to be in a mythological sense. Now, Cadmus. Here's an image of Cadmus slaying the dragon at the Castilian Spring. Again, he's the son of King Agenor of Phoenicia, and he's sent to find Europa, and as I mentioned, the oracle tells him to follow a cow to this area of Boeotia. Okay? Now, excuse me. So he, and so Cadmus was dated by Herodotus, and Herodotus is the one of the early Greek historians, assuming Cadmus existed, and again, we don't know that any of these people ever really existed in these forms, probably not. But supposedly, he is the creator of the Phoenician alphabet, okay, which was later adapted by the Greeks. That is the first alphabet system that we have in the West. And supposedly his date was from around 2000 BC, okay, so well before all these things, and that would explain his involvement in the founding of, that Minoan civilization. Okay. So, so what he does is he goes to this place, and he's going to founds a city called Cadmea. And when you do this, he arrives with his men, and he goes to, you make a sacrifice to the gods when you go to a place. So you have to go to the spring water to wash. But there's this dragon, and the dragon ends up killing several of his men. So he kills the dragon at the spring, and as a result, he actually ends up having to. There's always the dragon is always sacred to some deity, so he ends up having to do some kind of penance for that. But in any case, he does slay this dragon, and when he does, I'm going to read you the story of this. Okay, this is from I believe I got this from Theoi. Okay. While Cadmus stood over his conquered foe, contemplating its vast size, a voice was heard, from whence he knew not, but he heard it distinctly, commanding him to take the dragon's teeth and sow them in the earth. He obeyed. He made a furrow in the ground and planted the teeth, destined to produce a crop of men. Scarce had he done so when the clods began to move, and the points of spears appear above the surface. Next helmets with their nodding plumes came up, and the shoulders and breasts and limbs of men with weapons, and in time a harvest of armed warriors. Cadmus, alarmed, prepared to encounter a new enemy, but one of them said to him, "Meddle not with our civil war." With that he who had spoken smote one of his earth-born brothers with a sword, and he himself fell pierced with an arrow from another. The latter fell victim to a fourth, and in like manner the whole crowd dealt with each other till all fell slain with mutual wounds except 5 survivors. One of these cast away his weapons and said, "Brothers, let us live in peace." These 5 joined with Cadmus in building his city, to which they gave the name of Thebes. Now that's one version. There's another source of the name Thebes, but we called it Cadmea. And the name of these individuals was Spartoi, Spartoi. Okay? And yes, I should note that the dragon was, according to Apollodorus, the dragon was sacred to the god Ares. Ares is usually the same true of the python that Apollo slays, and he does end up having to do, Ares does wish to kill him for doing this, but Zeus had to intervene to save him, is how that particular thing worked. And he was a slave to Ares for 1 year to atone for killing of the dragon. And then he receives Harmonia, the daughter of Ares, and Aphrodite to be his wife. Okay, so there's the 5 Sportoi are left, and again they end up helping him found the city. Now, what's interesting is these dragon's teeth. There's another myth, that of Jason and the Argonauts, which we're not going to have time to cover this particular semester, I don't think. But Jason and the Argonauts, also when he is in Colchis to obtain the golden fleece, he also sows the other dragon teeth from this same dragon, presumably. And 5 more Spartoi pop up, and but the thing is, this time they want to fight him, but he throws a stone into the middle of them, and they end up fighting each other until they all die. So, interesting variation on that, and interesting symbolism there of the dragon's teeth. And there's to look at sort of the symbolism of that. I was doing some comparison with Hindu mythology, and apparently in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is the story of Krishna, the military exploits of Arjuna, they refer to these dragon's teeth as thorns in the side of Mother Earth. So it's interesting. I'm just reading through my notes here. I don't want to read all of them to you. And that's interesting. In Maccabees, it also says that the Spartoi are related to the Hebrews, the Israelites and the Judites, and that the Greek Spartans, who were Helios worshippers, belonged to religious alliances with the faithful Jewish heroes of the Old Testament of the Bible. So, a lot of interesting stories and comparisons that get around here, but nonetheless, you have this idea of the teeth being sown into the earth, and of course the serpent imagery as well. But the way in which he slays the serpent, but then also ends up sort of making peace. Because in this case, the serpent, if it's sacred to god heirs, it seems to be more of a masculine force than a feminine one in the way that it's represented. But nonetheless, we're talking about a taming of the forces of the earth and the forces of nature. Okay, so Cadmus and Harmonia have children. And Cadmus and Harmonia, by the way, at the end of their lives are turned into serpents, and they slither away into the woods. Pentheus succeeds Cadmus as the king of Thebes, and he's killed after challenging Dionysus. Now, this story is told in Euripides' play The Bacchae, Bacchae, where Dionysus, with all of his rituals of wine, and the great orgiastic and ecstatic rites that go along with him, that Pentheus, of course, is alarmed by these, and he also doubts the divinity of Dionysus. Now, if Dionysus is his brother, you could probably understand that, although when you listen to the Bacchae, it's almost like he doesn't even know who Dionysus is. Of course, they do have different mothers. They're more like half-brothers, I suppose. So Pentheus, but eventually, because Pentheus rejects Dionysus and his divinity and tries to have him arrested, which you can metaphorically look at as, he is trying to forcibly detain that aspect of human consciousness, that more chaotic or trickster aspect of human consciousness. It gets back at him. It tricks him. That goes back to the sort of the metaphorical saying of it's what's often said when C.S. Lewis says, the one thing that the devil wants you to do the most is to deny that he exists, and that's the greatest thing the devil feels he can do. And the reason, what that really means, is the idea that yes, the more you deny that quote unquote devil in yourself, or that Dionysiac element, which may or may not, it's not evil necessarily, but it's disorderly and not socially proper. The more that you deny it, and the more that you try to push it away or imprison it or repress it, the more control it actually has over you. So there's sort of a psychological metaphor there. But Pentheus is destroyed. He's torn apart by Maenads, particularly by his own mother, who is participating in the rites, and she thinks that he is a great lion about to attack her, so she tears him to pieces. And she's so excited at what she's done until she comes out of her ecstatic haze and realizes she's torn her own son to pieces. But anybody who might have been here last spring, if any of you were not freshmen, last spring we did we have a group on campus that does Greek dramas every April in the amphitheater, and they did the Bacchae last year. So rather interesting. Okay, so when Pentheus is killed, Labdacus founds a new dynasty, who is a brother through Polydorus. And, again, another half-brother. And what's interesting is Labdacus meets the same exact fate as Dionysus. Okay? Now we're seeing a pattern here. We're seeing groups that try to overcome nature by force. Okay? Or try to subvert nature. This is an important thing to think about with the incest theme in this particular group. One thing I also should mention here, if anybody's ever read Dante's Inferno, you'll notice frequent references to Dionysus and to Thebes throughout the Inferno, and the connection between the two. And I remember the first time I'd ever read the Inferno, I thought, I wonder why there's all these Theban connections. Well, of course, here it is. I mean, Dionysus is intimately connected with Thebes because he is a child of Cadmus. He's at least a grandchild of Cadmus, which is interesting. Okay? So Labdacus meets the same fate as Dionysus. He rejects him, and he ends up being torn apart by the Maenads as well. Okay. So he leaves behind an infant son, Laius, okay? Now, however, let's see here. Antiope, okay? And she is considered to be, let me see, I'm trying to think whose sister she is. She's related to these particular kings. She's related to Lycus, actually, okay, who is, he's actually one of the Spartoi, okay? And she is a, so he's the uncle of Antiope, and Antiope ends up being ravished by Zeus, and she produces two sons, Amphion and Zethus, okay? And so when Lycus dies, Laius ends up being sent into exile. That's our next slide. and Amphion and Zethus end up ruling Thebes for a while. Now, nothing really happens to them. They just die a natural death. Amphion married Niobe. Niobe's the one who had, I believe it was 7 sons and daughters, and then bragged that she was better than Leto, the mother of Apollo and Artemis. And so Apollo and Artemis went and slew all of her children and turned her into stone. You know, not not really good to be too critical there or too boisterous of one's own achievements in that realm, or really with any of the gods. It's a way of it's a problem with again, it becomes this sort of mucking with the natural force or taking it for granted. Okay, so Zethus marries Thebe, and again, this is where the name Thebes supposedly comes from. It's renamed in her honor. Okay, so these two die, and Laius finally comes and assumes the kingship. Now, while Laius is away, he is received in exile by Pelops. Pelops is king of Mycenae at this point, and Pelops, interestingly, has some curses and violations of his own, which we'll talk about in a different lecture. But what Laius does is he violates hospitality by abducting his son Chrysippus, who he is attracted to, who he's in love with. So this is a violation of the rules of Xenia, or hospitality. Okay, so he curses Laius. So now we've got, we've got an additional, again, this idea of forcing or violation that occurs here. That's part of this theme. First, we see about the forced suppression of a particular instinct, and this way we see an actual, something that leads to an actual violation of hospitality. And remember, Laius is the child, that is related to this family of Labdacus and Pentheus, who have, who openly rejected that side by rejecting Dionysus. Okay, so Laius marries Jocasta, and Jocasta, and they have a son. Now, of course, he receives an oracle that his son will kill him and marry his mother. So, of course, when they have the baby, they get rid of him. They drive spike through his feet, through his ankles, and they leave him to be exposed on Mount Kithaeron. And, of course, as a lot of these heroic stories will often happen, he's brought by a shepherd to King Polybus of Corinth, because he feels sorry for the baby. They take the spike out. Now, of course, his feet are swollen from having the spike through it, so he ends up being known as Swellfoot, which is or Oedipus. Okay? And, of course, he has a limp after that. He's slightly lame from having that happen to him. Okay? Now, I gave you an excerpt from Oedipus to read, and the excerpt that I gave you is a little bit, later on in the story. So, like we said, at this point we see that he is in Corinth. He believes he is the son of King Polybus. And one night, sort of at a party in Corinth, somebody being drunk, again, it's interesting the connection to Dionysus there and drunkenness, tells Oedipus that he's not really the son of the king and queen. You're not really, you're not their real child. This bothers him, okay? And the king and queen say, "Oh, don't pay any attention to that person, they're drunk." Mm-hmm. Well, he says, "Well, I'm going to find out." So he goes to the oracle at Delphi. And when he goes there, the oracle tells him the same thing his parents were told: "You are going to kill your father and marry your mother." And he is so horrified by this, he says, "Oh my gosh, I can't." He doesn't tell him that the king and queen of Corinth aren't his parents. He just says, "Oh my goodness, I can't go back to Corinth. I don't want that to happen." So now we've got two avoidances. We've got Laius trying to avoid fate by exposing his son, like leaving him to die. And then his son ends up living, and his son gets the oracle and says, "Oh, well, I don't want to meet this fate." So he decides to leave the city, not realizing that, the king and queen of Corinth are not his parents. So, on the way, driving his chariot, he comes across a driver who pushes him off the road. This is an early case of road rage. And so he gets into a fight, and he ends up killing the chariot driver, who turns out to be King Laius. Okay, now he doesn't know this. He doesn't even know the man's a king. He doesn't know anything. And the men who are with him turn around and go, and leave. But eventually, after this whole altercation, Oedipus goes on, and he comes to the gates of Thebes, and Thebes is now being pestered by the Sphinx. The Sphinx is a sort of part animal, some animal features, some human features. It's got wings, it's got claws. There's an image of it on the previous slide. sort of like half, it's got like the head of a human and the body of, like the body of a lion and the wings of, a bird. Something strange like that. And it asks a riddle, and whoever can't answer its riddle gets torn apart by the Sphinx. But Oedipus comes to the gate, and the Sphinx asks its riddle, and he answers it successfully. And the riddle is, what walks on 4 legs, then on 2, and then on 3? And the answer, of course, is, he'll say Oedipus would have said a man, or, the Greek equivalent of that, or, whatever. But nonetheless, it's, human being, because we crawl on all 4s, and then we walk on 2 legs, and then when we're older, we may walk with a cane. So, 4, 2, 3. He successfully answers the riddle, so the Sphinx flies away. Sphinx doesn't kill him. His riddle was answered. Something magical about riddles there that kind of translates even into the Middle Ages. You hear stories of trolls appearing in the middle of the night and people surviving by swapping riddles and answering them all night long until daybreak. So riddles are sort of magical in that way. And this seems to be one of the older examples of it. I'm not sure if there's an older one. I haven't really researched that. But interesting thing here. So, he saved Thebes from the Sphinx. They say, oh, you're a hero. Come in, become our king. Our king was killed, and, the queen can be your wife. So, here we go. The prophecy's been fulfilled. He's killed his father, and he's married his mother. And they have 2 sons and 2 daughters. They have Polynices and Itocles, and then they have 2 daughters, Antigone and Ismene. Okay? So, Sophocles, again, writes his great trilogy on Oedipus, and the first one is Oedipus Tyrannus, is the first of these. Actually, Antigone is technically the first, even though it's out of sequence. But if we start with Oedipus Tyrannus, that's the piece that I had you read from. The way the play starts is that there's a plague affecting Thebes. And when they go to the oracle, they find out that there's the murder of Laius has never been avenged. So, and Apollo is, he is a god of plagues. He's fond of visiting plagues on different, that's his favorite mode of punishment, just as Aphrodite's is infidelity or incest. This is his favorite mode. So Oedipus, and as you'll read, I think I underlined it as irony, where he is absolutely committed to finding the murderer. I will bring this person down myself. And it happens to be you. So Tiresias, the old blind prophet, shows up in this play, and of course Oedipus insults him when he tries to suggest that it's him. And Tiresias says, well, you don't want to hear what I have to say. And Tiresias finally says, fine, you're the one who's guilty. And of course Oedipus, oh, how dare you people are trying to overthrow me, and But then of course he comes to an eventual realization. They bring the shepherd who had rescued him, and then, and then Jocasta had said that, oh, well, there was such a she mentions a prophecy that makes Oedipus turn around and say, wait a minute. And then eventually, once they get their facts together, Jocasta realizes before anyone else what's happened, and she goes and hangs herself. Oedipus, once he realizes everything that's happened, he puts out his own eyes, and he goes into voluntary exile. Because Creon says he will not exile him, but then he does. Now, Antigone, his daughters are left behind. His children are left behind. Polynices and Itocles actually leave as well, but they are determined to fight against Creon, because Creon becomes king of Thebes, and they are going to rebel against him. So, because of the rebellion, when Polynices is killed in battle, she demands that he not be buried. But Antigone, who's still there, she can't bear the thought that her brother will not be buried. So she ends up performing a burial rite anyway, and she is sentenced to be buried alive by Creon. He basically walls her up in a tomb, and while she's in there, she hangs herself. Okay, because towards the end of the play, he has a change of heart, and he's going to release her. But she's already dead. So again, there's the tragedy. And Oedipus at Colonus is the third in the plays, and he comes to Colonus, which is really part of Athens. And he's there, and in this version, he's actually there with his daughters. He's there with Antigone. So this is clearly, in a way, this is something that's happened. It's like the Antigone should actually be last in the sequence, because Antigone is, this would have been after Oedipus had died. But he comes to Colonus with her, because he's blind, she helps him. And he ends up sitting down someplace, and the chorus tells him, don't sit here, this place is sacred land. And then when they discover who he is, they're worried that he's going to pollute their city. But, but the question begins to be raised, just like in the Oresteia at the very end when Orestes has the trial with Athena and the judges against the Furies. Is this person guilty? And in the end, it's Theseus who is king of Athens in this play, and decides that he's not guilty. And when Creon, at this point, actually, Oedipus, the oracles are saying that he is blessed. He's magical. He is actually almost immortal. He's like one of the gods. And, and so Theseus, so when Creon comes and he wants to take Oedipus back home, Oedipus says, I won't go with you. Oedipus' son shows up asking for his blessing to attack Thebes. Oedipus won't give it. He curses his son. Okay? And then, but when he died, and we don't even actually know that he dies at Athens. He just suddenly disappears. So we don't know if he's like some of these other heroes who is transported away somewhere. But nonetheless, wherever he dies, that place is supposed to be blessed. And Theseus will not allow Creon to take him away. And he says, no, he can stay here. He's under my protection. And of course, then he goes off, and we don't know if Oedipus is dead or if he's just been somehow transported by the gods to another realm. In any case, he has no more bodily life. So he's, for all intents and purposes, he's dead. Okay, so with the Oedipus theme, now, if we look at Oedipus in particular, we can see that this is a guy who, and again, like a lot of what we'll see throughout the sagas, there's a lot of an element of cursing, okay? Like Pelops curses Laius, and then Laius ends up with this, his son ends up, and actually that's how Laius cursed him. Your son will kill you and marry your mother. And the oracles bore that out. So, this is basically where you're seeing a whole family, a family's, the bad actions. Now, what are the bad actions of the Thebans? Well, there's a sense of going against one's own nature, okay? Fighting Dionysus is to go against one's nature, okay? Because that is part of your nature as a human being. To try to pretend that that's not you is to reject an entire side of yourself that you really need to, it doesn't mean you have to live that particular side. But the reason for the Dionysian rituals is that it gives that side a respectful expression. Okay? Now let's look at some of Freud and Jung on incest here. And I gave you these excerpts from Totem and Taboo, and I did give you an excerpt from Symbols of Transformation from Jung, which actually has probably a wider application than even the incest theme, because Jung doesn't treat incest directly, but he does talk about some of the malfunctioning of sort of the anima animus. But let's talk about Freud first. He says, in this, society must defend itself against the danger that the interests which it needs for the establishment of higher social units may be swallowed up by the family. Okay? That's a really important key point. We'll just read through all these. Mother or father are first to show affection. Future partners of the grown-up child may reflect qualities of the parents. Okay, will you ever hear that you get married to your parents? The idea is that the partner that you pick, in some weird way, you'll come to realize is somehow like your parents, or like your mom or dad. Not because, and again, when we get to the incest thing, it's not that you literally, Freud will talk about it as a real sexual thing. Most people cast doubt on that. It may not be a real sexual thing, but when it comes to your unconscious images, the anima or animus image that you eventually develop that you will project onto the person you fall in love with as an adult may reflect qualities of the mother-father image, which are not, by the way, your mother or father. These are, this is, again, it's an image. You project an archetype of the mother or the father onto your actual parents, and the two of them become conflated to a certain degree. So, what you see as the archetype of the mother may reflect your own biological mother, even though she is no more the mother archetype than your, wife, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, husband is a reflection of the anima or is the anima or animus. What you see merely when you fall in love is the qualities of that archetype in that person that are projected onto that person but are not that person. Okay. But what we're saying here, and then of course he says neurosis comes in when this repressed infantile urge lasts into adulthood. Now let's see, let me just take a look at Freud here. I have the text in front of me. So we have page 225. I think I only gave you like a few pages of this. So if we go in the middle where you'll see like the little number 2 after he says, described as damped down libido. The next sentence, but by the postponing of sexual maturation, time has been gained in which the child can erect, among other restraints on sexuality, the barrier against incest, and can thus take up into himself the moral precepts which expressly exclude him from his object choice, as being blood relations, the persons to whom he has loved in his childhood. Respect for this barrier is essentially a cultural demand made by society. Society must defend itself, and there it is again, against this danger, that the interests which it needs for the establishment of higher social units may be swallowed up by the family. And for this reason, in the case of every individual, but in particular of adolescent boys, it seeks by all possible means to loosen their connection with their family, a connection which, in their childhood, is the only important one. Okay? So in other words, what Freud is saying here, he will agree with Jung that we move from being, sort of enmeshed in the identity of our parents to developing identities of our own. And he says really, and he says particularly, and this goes back to the idea that women tend to function in relationship rather than as individuals, which is not necessarily true anymore. But when we think about ideas of the feminine, as we think about coming into relationship, okay? With men, it tends to be more of a focus on becoming an individual. And like I said, in modern world, I think it's the same for women as well. But even if we're just talking archetypically, women, the male archetype is an individual one. It's the idea of, of reason. It's the archetype of the warrior, of civilization, of building society. So therefore, this person must become an individual. They cannot be tied to the family. They have to be, the hero is somebody who works in the interests of society. Okay, so this is what is going on here. If the son remains bound up with the family and doesn't go out on his own, or is dominated by the father or the mother, that ability to be a productive member of society is stunted. And this is really the psychological meaning of the incest taboo. You have to. What you're seeing here is, just as cannibalism is a devouring of usually it's father-son cannibalism, so it's sort of the devouring of the son by the father in a lot of Greek myth, which is the idea that, again, there's that squelching of the potential. The father wants to dominate the family and cut off any future expansion or progress. So therefore, that is taboo. You cannot do that. With incest, what this is it's another version of keeping it in the family. You don't go out, you don't meet new people, you don't develop new ideas, you don't bring new influences in. You just keep to the same old thing, and keeping it to the same old thing is not good. It's not healthy for society. Society has to move forward. Okay? There has to be, I don't necessarily want to sound 100% progressive, because sometimes it is good to return to certain types of values or certain types of things. But generally speaking, in order to build the family and to build the society, there has to be a movement outward, not a retreat inward to the family. Okay? Now what Jung says in the piece that I gave you from Symbols of Transformation, he hasn't mentioned incest directly, but he does in the one part, but he basically says it's related to the mother or father archetype and later to the animus or anima, because as I mentioned, your mother-father image later grows into your animus or anima image. Okay, so yeah, there's that. It sounds weird, but it's not as gross and weird as you might think. Because again, you're talking archetypes. You're talking about certain qualities. When people look for a wife, if a man looks for a wife, okay, he might be looking for somebody who might have some of the best qualities that are similar to his mother. Not somebody who necessarily is just like his mother. That sounds really Norman Bates, Psycho. But it's somebody who, we're not talking about domination, but somebody perhaps who can see the best qualities in their parents, and, because that's what their experience is, that's what they end up looking for in a mate, okay? Now he says, since the son is not conscious of the incest tendency, it's projected upon the mother or her symbol. Okay? And that's exactly what I've just said. That ends up, it's, this connection, this desire to be connected to the mother, okay, which has to be broken. Jung agrees with Freud on this. It must be broken in order to, to mature. But that sort of desire to be with the mother, which, again, Freud would say has a very sexual nature. Jung kind of stops just short of it. Nonetheless, what he calls the incest tendency ends up being projected upon the mother or the symbol of the mother. And he says, however, since the unconscious image is not, since it is the unconscious image and not the real mother, it's not real incest. Okay, so the desire to be, the child who clings to his mother and gets jealous of the father's attention of the mother, which is your sort of your traditional Oedipal complex. It's not real incest. It's not like the child really desires his mother sexually. It's just this desire to stay within the family. And at some point, there, for both men and women, there is a need to be pushed outward. Okay. And he says, actually, the desire is really the unconscious here, just trying to be noticed. And in his little write-up on this that I gave you, I think if you look at the last page, that's probably the most salient part. And I don't actually have it in front of me because I'm trying to print things out, and my printer is not cooperating with me. But he sort of gives a summary of that towards the end of the reading that I had given you. And he goes back to the same theme, the idea that it isn't, how psychologically it's sort of unhealthy to remain dominated by the family. As you get older, you should not be dominated by the family. You need to turn outwards and be your own person. Okay? And I don't know whether any of you are have that kind of a conundrum in your life where perhaps you're in college and your parents still do an awful lot of things for you. Well, what Freud and Jung would say, and probably what society would say, well, at some point that's got to, you got to move away from that. You got to stop. You've got to go out, and everything can't just be about, it's nice to be in harmonious relationships with your family. It's not that you need to, completely cut your family off. But you need to do your own thing. You need to not say, well, gee, this is what I really want to do with my life, but my family says no. You can't really, in this society, that would be unfortunate, let's put it that way, if you did something like that. Don't, be your own person, not the person your family tells you to be. Because then you don't grow and there are no new ideas or new or fresh influences introduced. It just becomes old and it becomes stale, and eventually it dies. And when you see these families that are all utterly destroyed by their internal decisions and dominations of certain impulses that end up getting passed down through generations, the moral there, if there is one, is you need to break the connection to the old family curse, as it were. That's what a lot of this has to do with, and that is a psychological process. What you're doing when you're a child is fine when you're a child. As you're getting older, some of those things are not fine anymore. You need to be able to break out of those, and you need to transform. Okay. Now, I wanted to note this, because this is interesting. There's a book that I'm reading for my dissertation, among other things, called The Bottom of the Garden, A History of Fairies, Hobgoblins, and Other Troublesome Things. Now, fairy lore is actually from a later period, although ancient Greece does have ideas of Marmo and Gello and the Lamia, which are sort of these monstrous creatures that steal children or eat children in the middle of the night. But even so, Perkis, the piece that I gave you is a short piece where she talks about incest in witch trials, and where these women claim to, she mentions Janet Weir, who is in contact with the fairies. And what's interesting in her case and in another witchcraft case, both women were guilty of incest. But they said that they had been involved with the fairies. And, so why would you say you were involved with the fairies if you were involved in incest? Why would you do that? And what she notes here is that incest, and this is a quote from her, puts you outside the law and gives you magical powers. And and so having an outsider status, being the magician, being the witch, being the wise woman of the, that can be a source of terrible power. It's something that people are afraid of. Okay? So if you are essentially powerless, that can sort of... I'll read it directly from her. Let me just open my text here. So in the middle of page 197, underneath the little quote, in this story, what Janet does is a violation of many norms. The incest taboo, yes, but as well, she's on top. Oh, and she is talking eagerly about having a child who will be the offspring of incest. And yet Janet, when asked about incest, talks about fairies, telling a story which seems to have little to do with this story, a story about fairies. Why? Why might both Elspeth, who's the other woman, and Janet talk with fairy when they think incest? First, incest puts you outside the law and gives you magical powers, like I said up there. If you survive this huge apocalyptic transgression of the oldest and strongest of old taboos, if your house does not fall in on you, the lightning bolts remain in the sky, then you must be special, magical. The gods of Egypt and Greece and some royal families are allowed to commit acts of incest that would destroy ordinary mortals. This shows how special they are. Oedipus himself eventually becomes magical. The outsider status conferred by incest can be desolation or a source of terrible power, because from outside, the wounded subject can strike at the healthy. Incest is a symbol of magic and a reason for it. Writing about modern incest survivors, a recovered memory guru, Judith Herman, reluctantly admits that some women embrace their crime with defiance and pride. As initiates into forbidden sexual knowledge, they felt they possessed magical powers. One woman described herself as a bad witch and expressed the fear that she could cause to others to sicken with her thoughts. Loathing herself, this woman has nevertheless turned self-loathing to some account. Okay? So it's interesting. So it's the power to be gained by transgressing the taboo. It goes back to the limit, what we talked about, the liminal. Crossing this boundary, you've crossed to the other side. It's kind of like the shaman. Now you've become invulnerable. You're a taboo individual for what you've done, but you've crossed over into a place you're not supposed to cross into. Okay? So it's very interesting. And the connection with fairies, of course, fairies are liminal creatures, as we have mentioned. Okay? So in a sense, it's analogous to death, but at the same time, you can be there. You're outside the community's laws and the community standards, but you're still there, and you can still have an impact, even if it's a negative impact. Okay? So, interesting ideas here. So, let's just recap what we've discussed here with regard to Oedipus, and with regard to sexuality, incest as a psychological phenomenon. Okay? Gods are forces of nature. Okay, we said they're purely metaphorical. Marriage or intimacy of sibling deities only represents a merging of qualities. Okay, so that's when we're talking about gods, not about humans. Okay? And even when we're talking about archetypal forces, that's where Jung comes in. He says, well, yeah, the young man might project that feeling onto his mother, but it's not really about his mother, it's about the archetypal image. So it's a similar thing. Archetypes can be likened to the gods in this sense. They are, they don't have anything to do with any living person, although we may project those qualities onto living beings. Okay, Oedipus' story shows the danger of incest in humans, not properly expanding society, keeping it in the family. Yet, Oedipus becomes magical as a result. Now, this is in no way any kind of advertisement for incest. I would certainly, it's just interesting how this manifests in literature, not only in mythology, but also in folklore. It becomes sort of a taboo, and of course, again, these are associated with the witch trials, so it's associated with something evil, something negative. Somebody who has moved outside of the boundaries of society by doing this, by violating the ultimate social taboo. But, again, if we don't think about literal incest and its manifestations, it is important to think about psychologically. The taboo against incest just means it's a juncture to grow up and to move out, to not stay within the family, to not let your mother make decisions for the rest of your natural life, or your father. This is about you becoming you, not becoming simply a clone of your parents or what your parents tell you should do. Okay, so that's something to think about when we think about the incest taboo and psychology and these myths, because what all these sagas what the saga is meant to show is how the family connection, when there's something problematic, can actually be destructive. Not to say, again, that you can't, think about, if any of you are Christian and read the Bible, there's a point where Jesus says, you must leave your father and mother and take up your cross behind me. Okay? That's a very similar psychological statement, and again, it doesn't mean that you have to hate your family and reject them, but it does mean, that you have to, they're your family, you love them, but they should not stop you from doing what it is you need to do with your life. Okay, and I think that's the message that we have here. So that is all for this week.